Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 23rd of June of 2024. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Kharkiv and Kharkiv region. During the previous 3 days the Russians were bombing these territories significantly. For example, today the Ukrainian sources and the Russian sources published additional videos of how the Russians were bombing the territory of Kharkiv with FABs. In this video we can see the arrival of another FAB bomb, and as a result of that strike one building was completely damaged and almost reduced to ruins. Later we got some videos and photos that were geolocated the results of the strike. Let's take a look at the photo. As you can see in the video, almost the entire building was reduced to ruins. I would like to point your attention on the roof of the building and of course on some part of the building. So maybe from this angle we can see that just a part of the building was damaged, but if you take a look once again at the roof, you're gonna see that the explosion probably took place inside of the building, and most likely everything inside was completely destroyed. So according to geolocations, according to the video that was published, the Russians were using FAB. And I would like to point your attention on the accuracy of that strike. As you can see, once again, the rocket, the bomb hit exactly the building, which probably, according to the Russian sources, the Ukrainians were using, let's say, for military purposes. Maybe there was like a camp, let's say camp, or the temporary position of Ukrainian forces. Now let's move to Liptsy itself. Today we have a few geolocations. One geolocations are coming from the central part, the serious geolocations are coming from the central part, and one geolocation is coming from the western part of the village. First, let's take a look at the central part. There were also FAB strikes. Let's take a look at them. The Russians in this case were using probably FAB 500, and as a result of those strikes the Russians managed to destroy some warehouses, temporary positions of armed forces of Ukraine, and many other important buildings and constructions in this area. And if we zoom in better, we're gonna see that the Russians destroyed some building, and that those strikes that we've just been watching was pretty accurate. So the Russians, as a result of FAB, managed to hit the building, and probably they got exactly the building they were planning to hit. And now let's talk about FAB 3000. Today the Russians published another video of FAB 3000 arrival. Let's take a look at this video. In this video we can see a small part of Liptsy, and then we can see a very heavy explosion. And according to author of this video, this is the use of FAB 3000. And of course it's very important to geolocate this video on the map, and we have geolocated this, not we but some open source intelligence services. And if we zoom in better, we're gonna see that the FAB 3000 arrived here, exactly between the buildings. Not the Russians didn't hit even a single building. The Russians attacked basically the fields. Of course fields weren't the main Russian target. Obviously the Russians were planning to destroy something. So if we try to search for some buildings that the Russians probably were trying to hit, we can find this small area. This is something like a hospital for people with mental diseases. So this is a perfect place for temporary positions of armed forces of Ukraine. It's like one building, not one building, it's a series of buildings that are connected with each other, and it's perfect position for deployment of Ukrainian forces. So probably the Russians were trying to hit this area. And if we calculate the distance, let's say between the closest barrack, between this barrack and let's say the area of FAB 3000 arrival, we can see that the distance is a little bit less than 200 meters, more precisely 150 meters. So and I would like to remind you, and probably it's better to open the videos of FAB strikes that took place during the previous few days as well. For example, let's take a look once again at the first video of FAB 3000 arrival. This is the hospital, and in a second we're gonna see the FAB explosion. And once again the Russian FAB 3000 wasn't pretty accurate. The bomb arrived not in the building but few meters, let's say around, maybe 10, maybe 20 meters or something like this. So the 3 videos of the use of FAB 3000 tell us that the Russians are still developing this new technology. We see that this technology still is not so accurate, let's say, as FAB 1500 or 500 technologies. And as for let's say, damage, and as for let's say the use of these different types of FAB, I think that FAB 1500 and FAB 500 is better than FAB 3000 due to its accuracy. I'm sure that in a month or in a two, the Russians will be able to improve this new technology, and after that FAB 3000 will be as accurate as the old generation FABs. But for now, this is very, let's say, dangerous weapon, of course, but once again, this is not 100% accurate. Now let's move to the line of combat contact, and let's talk first about Gluboka. The Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours conducted significant number of attempts to attack the Russian forces inside of this village. We have a few videos that were published yesterday, and we have few posts that were published today. According to Russian sources, during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians, for the first time since the battle for Gluboka, began using not just a small groups of soldiers with under support and cover of 2 or 3 personnel carriers. During the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians conducted a, let's say full-scale offensive operation in Gluboka with the use of 1 tank and 6 personnel carriers. So something that the Russians have been using probably for the previous 7-8 months when they were attacking the Ukrainian positions. 1 tank and 5 or 4 personnel carriers. And the Russians are saying that when the Ukrainians entered Gluboka, and according to them they managed to enter Gluboka, 3 personnel carriers were destroyed at once, and after that the Ukrainians decided to fall back, and 1 tank and 2 personnel carriers that managed to survive abandoned their positions and moved back to Liptsi. So this is a small episode. That was a small episode from inside of the village. Now let's move further in direction of Volchansk. There are still very heavy clashes, as you can see, but probably 10th or 20th day in a row we haven't been receiving even a single update about additional progress, neither from the Russian side nor from Ukrainian. The front line was completely stabilized. The Russians continue bombing and attacking the citadel. As you can see, for these purposes the Russians mainly are using Toretsk tower systems. As we discussed, the Russians are limited in FAB 3000s, and as we can see, the Russians are not using FAB 3000 in this area, and probably also due to its accuracy, because if they had bombed this territory with FAB 3000 and somehow FAB 3000s, let's say, moved on Russian positions, this can cause significant damage to Russians themselves. So that's why let's say the Russians are limited in this direction just with the local sources and just with FAB probably 500 and Toretsk tower systems. There are still very heavy clashes for the main supply road between Volchansk and Tikha, but the Russians until now were able to repel every single Ukrainian attack, and the Russians still control this territory. As for interesting, I would like to point your attention to Russian artillery strikes in the vicinity of Bachkova and Chaikovka. As when talking about the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, more and more often they start using exactly these 2 villages and these directions in their military reports. And they're talking about this territory almost every single day by saying that the Russians managed to deal significant damage to the Ukrainians, to engineering machines, to armored vehicles. And on that video, we just could see how the Russians destroyed a significant number of engineering machines exactly in this area, where Ukrainians were trying to establish another pontoon bridge with the purpose to redeploy forces from the southern part to the northern part. So as you can see, the Ukrainians indeed trying to create additional roads how to redeploy forces from the southern part in the northern direction. But as you can see, on the other hand, that the Russians control Vovchi River and destroy everything that they can see or discover. Now let's move to the northern Kupiansk direction. During the previous few days, we received significant number of geolocations and videos from Sinkovka area. We start receiving more and more often updates from this territory, which confirms that the Russians are planning to intensify their activity with the purpose to pin down the Ukrainians and to force Ukrainians to send some reinforcements and reserves in direction of Sinkovka. Obviously, the Russians are not able to break through Sinkovka Dukovka and Kupiansk from this direction, the only thing they can do is to pin down some additional reserves of armored forces of Ukraine, while the main Russian forces are storming Peshchane and are storming Stelmakhovka. And by the way, according to this, about these two settlements, according to some Russian sources, for now without any geolocations confirming this, the Russians are about to finish the clearing of Peshchanovka in the north and of Stelmakhovka in this area. So probably during the next week or two, the Russians will establish complete control over these two villages, which is going to be a very big disaster for the Ukrainians, because this will allow the Russians to begin the battle for the foothold along Oskol River, which is very important, not just from the perspective of strategical value, but also from perspective of media victory. Now let's move further in Siver's direction. We have the same updates, almost the same updates as we used to receive, let's see, a week ago or 2 months ago. The Russians continue after withdrawing Sporno without any attempts to enter the territory, and the Russians began bombing and attacking the Ukrainians' 3 lines in the fortifications further in the northern direction in the vicinity of Vyimka. So we can make a conclusion that after the Russians managed to dig in deeper in this area, they began preparing the foothold and the positions of armored forces of Ukraine before further advances in the northern direction. As for Azdorlovka, according to some Russian sources, the village is already under Russian control for 50%. So we don't have any geolocations that can confirm this piece of news, but it's just the reports we received from the ground. Now let's move to Chasov Yar direction. Citadel still holds and Ukrainians are still in the area. And as you can see, this is a very big problem for the Russians. Currently, by the 23rd of June, we have significant number of citadels all over the entire line of combat contact, starting from, let's say, Volchansk and ending, let's say, in Ugledar. Lots of them, and as we can see, based on the videos and reports we receive on the ground, this is a very big problem for the Russians. And the Russians, for 3 years of special military operation, still haven't managed to find a solution how to break through these, let's say, defense strongholds. So as for Chasov Yar stronghold, there are still very heavy explosions without any progress on the ground. The Russians have just one area where they managed to advance. According to geolocations, the Ukrainian sources published the video of how the Russian soldiers were moving through this industrial zone under very heavy artillery fire from the side of armored forces of Ukraine. In this video we can see the Russian stormtrooper who was running from one building in direction of another under very heavy 5 FPV drones. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map and colored additional territory of industrial zone under color of Russian control. There are still 2 territories that without any confirmation of geolocations, but with confirmations from different sources. For example, according to military expert Riber, this territory that is blinking in front of your screen is already under Russian control, and this territory, these fields between Kalinovka and the railways, also under complete Russian control, according to the 98th Division, who is responsible for offensive operation in this direction. On the other hand, we continue receiving videos of how the Russians were bombing and attacking this territory with multiple launch rocket systems. Maybe the videos, these videos were made before the Russian attack, and those videos were something like artillery preparation before final attack. Now let's move to the most important direction, to Toretsk, New York area. As you can see, we have lots of very interesting details and updates, and the most important, we have lots of adjustments and changes on map. If you remember, the Russians started this offensive right after the Ukrainians decided to make rotation. The Ukrainians basically replaced and changed N24th Mechanized Brigade, who was always, since the beginning probably of Toretsk front line, was responsible for this direction, and the Ukrainians changed them for 41st Mechanized Brigade that was pretty damaged in the battle for Chasov Yar. By the way, if we take a look at this video, we can see that this video was made already by 24th Mechanized Brigade. If you have good quality, you can see that in the bottom of the video we can see icon, and it is written there 24th Mechanized Brigade. So we start receiving even first videos from defense of Chasov Yar from the 24th Mechanized Brigade. So 41st failed their mission to protect the territory, and the Russians managed to improve their positions further. According to Deep State, the Russians captured every single, let's say, stronghold tree-line fortification along this tree line. The Russians managed to improve their positions along Kalinova Street. The Russians managed to capture this landfill and so on. According to some pro-Russian sources, the Russians entered Pivnichna itself and captured first streets and first buildings inside of this area. So we are talking about Miru Street, about Kievskaya Street, and probably about Shirshova Street. So maybe this territory, let's add this on map for better understanding of the situation. So according to some Russian, pro-Russian mappers, this territory is also already under Russian complete control, and the Russians are continuing their improvement of their positions. But as we discussed in the previous videos, most likely the Russians are not going to enter Chasiv Yar itself, not Chasiv Yar, Toretsk itself, Pivnichna, or let's say all these settlements, due to significant number of strongholds, let's say, that goes from the southern part in the northern direction. I have calculated 5 strongholds at least along the first line of defense. This is the coal mine, this is coal mine, the southern coal mine, this is it, and the landfill. So this is coal mine itself, and this is the landfill. And this area is well fortified by the Ukrainians. It's a strategical height without any possibilities for the Russians to storm this area. This is the high-rise building area inside of Pivnichna, which reminds us of Vovchansk citadel, as well as Chasiv Yar citadel and Uglidar citadel, and of course Konstantinovka citadel. And based on the previous experience in 4 different towns and settlements, we can make a conclusion that most likely the Russians are not able to capture this territory. Only in case of some special tricky operation they can do this. But when talking about regular clashes, regular activities, regular tactics that the Russians are using, they will not be able to capture this territory very fast. They will have to spend significant number of days and maybe months before they are able to do this. The next stronghold is another coal mine, including the landfill to the west of the coal mine. Also the area that the Russians most likely will not be able to bypass very fast. Then we're moving to another high-rise building area. This is already inside of Toretsk itself. Significant number of buildings, small Uglidar, whatever you want, or Chasiv Yar, or another Vovchansk. So this is exactly in front of your eyes, and surrounded by significant number of low-rise buildings and so on, which is also makes this territory impossible to capture very fast. And the last stronghold, another coal mine by the name of Toretsk with the landfill to the west. So summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that Toretsk, it's not something like Vovchansk, of course. It's like 5 Vovchansk, 5 Chasiv Yars, 5 Krasnogorovok, 5 Uglidars in the same direction. There is everything the Russians managed to, let's say, capture in the past: high-rise building areas, landfills, tericons, everything the Russians have experience with. They faced exactly in this area, but 5 times more concentrated than they used to see in front of their eyes. So very powerful stronghold, to my opinion, without any possibilities to capture this territory. So that's why the Russians, and of course the Russians, are not going to storm this area in front. Of course, we have some video from this area, and this is the first video since the beginning of the battle for Toretsk that was published by the Russians. In this video, we can see the redeployment of Ukrainian forces that were discovered by the Russians, and after that, the Russians destroyed the area with cluster rounds. So, what the Russians are planning to do, and according to my understanding of the situation, the Russians will try first of all to encircle Toretsk, but for these purposes, first they need to block the Ukrainians inside of Toretsk along this red line. So they're going to repeat the Vovchansk experience. They got as close as possible to Vovchansk citadel, but they haven't captured this territory, and now within the very close distance, the Russians are bombing and attacking this territory heavily with SOS flamethrower systems, with aviation bombs, and as I understand, they are planning to do the same. First, they will get as close as possible. They will they will block the Ukrainians inside along this let's say line of combat contact, along this defense belt, and after that the next Russian group of forces will continue moving further in the northern direction. First they will answer Delivka, first they will capture Druzhba, this is Druzhba, then they will move further inside of Delivka, and then they will move even further in direction of Alexandra Shultine. And there are lots of villages, there are lots of towns, lots of Ukrainian positions positions that the Russians will try to capture by attacking from the southern part in direction of the northern part through the villages like Druzhba, Delievka, until the Russian gets the villages like Bila Gora and Alexander Shultine. This will allow the Russians to defeat the Ukrainians completely and to get the southern outskirts of Chasiv Yar itself, and furthermore this will allow the Russians to get the southeastern outskirts of Konstantinovka. So this is the Russian plans, and also from the same area the Russians will be able to establish fire control over the main supply roads that goes from Konstantinovka to Toretsk. So while one group of forces blocks the Ukrainians from a very close distance, another Russian group of forces will move further in the next northern direction with the purpose to get to Konstantinovka, Chasiv Yar, and to cut the main supply road. Of course, if when talking just about this, let's say operation, about these attacks, it's not enough for the Russians to capture Toretsk, because also you need to attack the Ukrainians from, let's say, western direction. As for the western direction, we continue receiving a significant number of updates from the villages of Novoalexandrovka and Vozdvyzhenka. As for Novoalexandrovka, today Deep State published another video, another photo. Basically, according to this photo, they have access to some videos that probably was published by the Ukrainians that most likely we're going to receive or see tomorrow or the day after. In this photo, some Russian soldiers were discovered in the most northern part of Novoalexandrovka. So basically, some Russian soldiers were discovered here. The movements of Russian soldiers were discovered here. This evidence, this let's say piece of news, give us the right to correct the map, to adjust the map, and to color this territory as a territory under Russian control. Also, according to Deep State, the northern part, most northern part of Novoalexandrovka is also under complete Russian control. And we are talking about this territory. For now, we haven't received any geolocations confirming this, so that's why we are going to color this territory as a contested area. But as when talking about the Russians, according to them, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation that have been taking place probably since the beginning of the previous week, managed to answer Vozdvyzhenka itself and to capture the stronghold that lays, let's say, on the south eastern outskirts of the village. So summarizing everything, the Russians managed to enter the stronghold, and now they're trying to dig in deeper. So if this information is confirmed, and if the Russians are able to capture Vozdvyzhenka, this is going to be a complete disaster for the Ukrainians from many perspectives. From first sight, this is of course the operation to cut the main supply road M32, and basically to begin the Toretsk cauldron operation from the west. So, and this is a very big problem for the Ukrainians, because the main supply road between Pokrovsk and Konstantinovka will be cut off by the Russians. The Russians will be able, first of all, to secure their flanks, and after that, another group of Russian forces will begin clearing the territory to the west of Toretsk, of New York, and many other towns and settlements. And from this perspective, the Russians will encircle Toretsk and will begin the offensive in direction of Konstantinovka. So, summarizing everything, we see that the picture for the Ukrainians is developing not so good, and mostly in Russian favor. As for the foothold to the west of Avdiivka, as you can see, we have significant number of geolocations. Most of them are about how the Russians were attacking and destroying the Ukrainian armored vehicles and so on. But probably this one is the most important video. In this video, we can see how the Ukrainian Bradley was attacking the Russian forces, and the work of Bradley was filmed by Ukrainian FPV drone, who was probably flying above him, trying to secure, let's say, the Bradley from some Russian strikes, or maybe from some another Russian weapon. This video shows us how the Ukrainian Bradley from along this tree line was attacking the Russian forces in Sokol, or somewhere in the eastern direction. But if we calculate the distance between Bradley and Sokol itself, or nearest Russian geolocated position like this one, the distance is around 3 kilometers. Obviously, the Ukrainian Bradley wasn't attacking the Russians within a distance of 3 kilometers. Obviously, the Ukrainian Bradley was attacking the Russians probably somewhere along this line. This video with Ukrainian Bradley confirms that most likely the Russians managed to move even further in the western direction, and probably everything that located to the right side of this red line is already under Russian control. As for Novoselovka-Persh, once again, significant number of videos of how the Russians continue its hunting for Ukrainian armored vehicles of Western production and basically destroying it inside between the fields and buildings in this area. As for Yasnobrodovka, today different mappers have updated their maps showing additional Russian progress and additional Russian control over the main supply roads and Yasnobrodovka itself. I expected the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation would provide us additional details and would confirm complete control over this territory, but yet the Russians haven't done this. So I believe that tomorrow or the day after, the Ministry of Defense will announce this information, and after that we will color this territory completely under color of Russian control. As for South Donetsk direction, we have adjusted map back. We have few videos from the southern part of Konstantinovka of how the Russians were bombing and attacking the edge positions of Ukrainian forces inside of this village. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map and returned some farms in the southeastern part of Konstantinovka under complete Ukrainian control. Pro-Ukraine mappers Deep State reported about additional Russian progress in the fields between Solotka and Vodyana, and if we calculate the distance between edge Russian positions in the area and main supply road TO524, the distance is less than 2.5 kilometers, which is 2.5 kilometers. So it's a very short distance, and the Russian tanks are already can bomb and attack the road from, let's say, hidden positions, and we can say about certain fire control by already vehicles, which of course will lead to losses, to increased losses from the Ukrainian side. Now we are moving further. We haven't received almost anything from Staromayorsk direction. We have additional updates from, let's say, Zaporozhye area. According to information we have, as we discussed in the previous videos, Kharkiv is the primary target of Ukrainian counter-offensive operation that is going to take place in the very near future. And according to information we have, Zaporozhye direction is going to be the next target of armored forces of Ukraine. But the Ukrainians are not planning to attack in Robotyne, because during the previous year, Robotyne and Verbova were reduced to ruins. The Ukrainians are planning to attack in direction of Energodar through Vasilievka. So that's why the Ukrainians are concentrating their forces in this area significantly. On the other hand, we see that the Russians have almost returned control over every single square kilometer that the Russians lost during the Ukraine's greatest counteroffensive. We have adjusted the map based on the real geolocations on video, and most likely these fields, that's some part in the gray zone and some part is in the yellow zone control, most likely are already under complete Russian control, because I can't imagine how the Ukrainians can control this territory under very heavy Russian artillery and FPV drone fire. Now let's move to Kherson direction. During the previous 24 hours, we haven't received any videos about Ukraine activity, but we received significant number of videos from the Russian side. For example, in this video we can see the use of Russian FAB 1500 or FAB 500 as a result of another strike. A very big building, command center or headquarters of armored forces of Ukraine was destroyed, and we see that very heavy and this is the question about accuracy. I believe that if the Russians were using FAB 3000, they managed to do even bigger damage than we can see right now, but maybe the Russians in this case would bomb river, but not the building itself. So about the accuracy, the FAB 3000 is not ready to be used in the zone of the special military operation, but it's not the question of whether the Russians are able to do this or not, whether the Russians are able to improve this or not. It's just a question of time. Maybe tomorrow, maybe in a month, the Russians will improve this technology and they will start bombing the territory of Ukraine with significant accuracy. A terrorist attack took place today in Crimea. We can call this like this, according to the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation. During the previous 24 hours, the NATO countries in the United States of America reconnaissance drones were flying above the Black Sea, filming and making reconnaissance operation in Crimea itself. Mainly the United States of America were interested in Simferopol and Sevastopol. And according to the Russians, the, let's say, specialists of the United States of America were, let's say, configuring the missiles, attacks missiles. Later we got report that Ukrainians launched 5 attacks missiles on the territory of Sevastopol. Later the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation provided us additional information today at 12 p.m. The deliberate terrorist missile strike was carried out of the cities of Sevastopol with 5 American ATACMS operational tactical missiles equipped with cluster warheads. During the missile attack, 4 American attack missiles were intercepted by air defense forces on duty. The detonation of the 5th American missile's fragmentation warhead in the air resulted in the numerous casualties among the civilian population of Sevastopol. All flight missions of American attack operational tactical missiles are programmed by American specialists based on their own satellite reconnaissance data. Therefore, the responsibility for the deliberate missile strike on the civilians of Sevastopol primarily lies with Washington, which supplied this weapon to Ukraine, as well as with Kiev regime, from whose territory this strike was launched. Also, we have the video of that attack, more precisely not the video, but the reaction of people who was taking rest and their holidays along the shore of Crimea, and at some point they start running away. According to information we have, more than 100 people suffered from that attack, and 3 people lost their lives, including 2 children. So that was a terrible attack, and the most important that people are talking about this, and everybody from the Russian side are expecting when the Russians will begin bringing down the US drones above the Black Sea. And according to information we have, probably this is going to start happening very soon. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.